Hello everybody and welcome back for another video. Today we're going to be touching on a couple of different subjects, one of them being bandstands, another being underground tunnels, and looking at possible connections between the two. Now this got started for me by looking into this bandstand that was in Forest Park in St. Louis, and according to the narrative we're told it was built in 1876. And then I believe it was renovated for the St. Louis Exposition of 1904. But eventually this particular bandstand got replaced by another bandstand, and it is now called the Nathan Frank Bandstand. And it's less ornate as the original, but there still exists this bandstand on that site. Now, where things got interesting for me is I came across a short video, which I will link, where a gentleman he's in the basement of this particular bandstand, and he was talking about secret tunnels. Now, he doesn't find any, but just this idea of underground tunnels and these bandstands, and maybe at one point there were openings to tunnel systems. That's just sort of speculative on my part, but I wanted to do a little research along those lines, and I came across maybe some interesting examples. And the first example takes us to Albert Park in Auckland, New Zealand. And when I started digging into this particular park, and it also has one of these bandstands, came across a little more information on it, and we're told that this particular bandstand or rotunda was built in 1901. And there's an unexpected relationship between the rotunda on the surface and air raid shelters underground. And apparently the tunnels stops directly underneath the rotunda, and there's a map that I found in this particular article, and it was just showing some of these air raid tunnels. But yeah, they stop right underneath this bandstand or rotunda. There's a few different names that you can give them. So I'm just wondering if they're just doing that with these bandstands, telling us, these sites were for bands to play. Meanwhile, maybe they were entrances to tunnel systems. Who knows? Just a thought. So I want to do a little more digging, and I came across another example. This one's in Scotland in the UK, and particularly Glasgow, and in this park, Cowan Park. And there was an interesting article talking about a wartime secret hidden beneath iconic bandstand. And here's just another photo of this bandstand, and it's kind of isolated to some degree. It's all by itself here. But reading this article, again talking about the secret underneath this bandstand, it talks about a concrete bunker which lies beneath the park. And there was this gentleman that was interviewed, and he was 69 at the time, but I think this article is from 2014, so he's in his 70s, but he was just recounting how he would talk to his mother, and she always talked about that the shelter, these shelters, underneath shelters, bunkers, that they were under the bandstand in this particular park. So again, could these bunkers just be repurposed older tunnel systems? I don't know, maybe. But again, just another example. So I just wanted to keep looking, and I came across another interesting article talking about the secret underground of Taos, New Mexico. And just the caption on this particular article was largely forgotten tunnels run beneath Taos Plaza and what was once the town's red light district. Now in this plaza, there is another bandstand. So it's interesting, they're talking about underground tunnels. So I wanted to read this article, just briefly highlighted a couple portions of it. But there's this, I believe it's a vintage clothing shop, and apparently there are two tunnels that run underneath this vintage clothing shop. One is supposed to go to the bandstand in the plaza. Interesting, where the town jail used to be. So this is just on your right, an image of one of these tunnels, or what's left of it. And just reading a bit further in this particular article, there is apparently another restaurant which is believed to have another tunnel that goes directly to the place where this church used to be. Okay, that's interesting. But the church burned down in the 60s, and they paved over the cemetery to build a parking lot. That sounds about right. Yeah, so I guess there was a tunnel that went from this particular vintage clothing shop to underneath this bandstand. So it's just another example of these bandstands popping up potentially over these tunnel systems. So I wanted to keep looking, and I found another example back to the UK, Ramsgate. We have the Ramsgate tunnels, and I came across some information saying that these tunnels were the largest network of civilian wartime tunnels. Here's just an image of this particular bandstand that's in Ramsgate, and I found a particular blog spot. They were talking about these tunnel systems that run underneath here, and I believe they refer to it as the Granville Caves. Now, this particular tunnel system, they were mentioning how entrances into the system are rumored to be from within the cellars of this hotel, the Granville Hotel, as well as another place, and also beneath the bandstand in Wellington Crescent. So that's this particular bandstand. So I guess underneath there's supposed to be an entrance to this tunnel system. Interesting. So you've got several examples where potentially these bandstands, underneath them are entrances to tunnel systems. Now, I'm not saying this is the case for all bandstands, but just exploring an interesting angle to some of these bandstands and how they might have been placed to cover up entrances into tunnel systems, potentially. So I thought that was interesting, and I just wanted to briefly share that with you guys. And this is just sort of introductory research, and there's more to be done along these lines. So that's all I wanted to say for now, but let me get into a video update. Okay, so I wanted to briefly give you some updates on my video from last week called the Demo Crew. And I came across, in that video I talked about how during a lot of these great fires, including Baltimore of 1904, Chicago of 1871, and including San Francisco, that earthquake and fire in 1906, in addition to all these great fires, you had, while that was happening, buildings were being dynamited and torn down, supposedly to create these fire breaks, which were supposed to stop the fires from growing. But it led to a ton of destruction. So I did a little more digging, and I came across another great fire, which may have involved intentional dynamiting of structures. And that's the Great Fire of Virginia City in 1875, and this is actually in the state of Nevada in the United States. But it was considered one of the worst disasters in state history, and you had more than 2,000 structures destroyed. So I was looking into this particular church called St. Mary's in the Mountains, and I came across an article talking about how this particular church was possibly dynamited during that Great Fire of 1875. And then I finally came across another article which spelled it out, and it was just talking about how during the Great Fire of 1875, the priest of this church, he was convinced to allow the church to be blown up as a means of slowing the fire's progress. So again, it's just another example how whenever you have these, or in a lot of instances, when you have these great fires, there's also a lot of dynamiting going on, intentional destruction of fires, which we're told are for the purposes of slowing down these fires. But you could see how that might just be a cover story to destroy these buildings. Again, that's just one view, but I thought it was interesting. In this particular church, these are photos from after that Great Fire, and this church was reconstructed, and I haven't been able to find any photos of this church prior to that Great Fire. And here's just another photo or image of this particular church. And in the background, by the way, there's this another church that was destroyed during that Great Fire, rebuilt, and it had a really interesting rose window. And there is a photo from 1866, before that Great Fire, which showcases that church, and it's just got this really interesting rose window. And you can see here they've kind of replaced that rose window. Yeah, so I just wanted to highlight some of these things and make an update to that previous video. But another little tidbit about that previous video, I got an interesting comment from Chad Jacobus. Did you know that the day before the great San Francisco earthquake of 1906, This Daniel Burnham, who was also the head architect for the Chicago World Fair, he stood before San Francisco City Council presenting his plan for a completely redesigned city. And I did not know that. So I was looking into that just a little bit, and I came across an article talking about the city that never was. So this architect, he had a plan that he created for a complete redesign of San Francisco, which involved a lot more green space. But some of the articles I found talked about how his plan, it was delivered to the Board of Supervisors, according to legend, on April 17th, just a day before much of the city burnt down, providing an outstanding opportunity to actually implement his plan. So I thought that was an interesting wrinkle to all this. And one of the photos from his plan, he proposed that he was going to build this 300-foot tall goddess statue on the top of Twin Peaks. So they really like their goddess statues, but this obviously never came to be. But I just wanted to mention it. I thought that was really interesting. You got this major earthquake and intentional destruction of buildings by dynamite, and then there's this plan ready to go where you have this plan to redesign this city. But it never came to pass, but just an interesting series of events. Now, I think that's it for today, but I do want to give a thanks to my patrons over on Patreon, and I really appreciate your support. And I just wanted to give a thanks to, I got some new patrons, and yeah, once again, thank you for all your support, and I just wanted to give them a shout out. So I think I will leave it here for today, but until next time, take care. Bye.
Don't let it bring you down. It's only castles burning. Just find someone who's stirring.